situation.
If a child's been in a school for a period of time, you
Next
don't want
remove
to
'em, yeah.
just move. And if the child had been raised and grown up in Woonsocket and the other parent moved to Narragansett, and again, I'm not saying that one school system is better than the other, but for the sake of argument, just say one is and say Narragansett was better. But the child's been with all his friends or her friends in Woonsocket. That's not a reason to rip that child out of that environment.
That's a very good point to bring up. And you say also that it's not dependent upon directly which child has more money, but what
No.
the best interest of the child.
Exactly.
And you enumerated several. I read, listed, ticked off perhaps 25. It would seem that some of those what's the best interest of the child might be a little bit gray, and you've started to broach that subject. How do they figure or counter what a child might think he or she wants at a certain age? A 4-year-old perhaps doesn't get a vote. A 15-year-old might. Who does, and how do you figure what the
Want
best
to talk about the
interest is?
age factor?
Yeah. Basically, the courts have said historically that a child that's under 12 or 13 years of age really shouldn't have that much input into a decision as to where he or she is going to live. A child who's older, and now 13, 14, 15, certainly is going to get more input into that. They're not going to get to make the final decision, but their input will be considered by a judge. And interestingly enough, as it's developed, children used to often be brought in at that age for a chambers conference with the judge, and the judge would listen and talk to the child.
Familiar.
I remember another old-time judge, this goes way back, it's a different judge, who used to sit with the child and say to that child, okay, let's say gold is very good, silver is really good, but not quite as good. Which parent is gold and which parent is silver? That's how he'd approach that with the child, which was sort of interesting. But I see that happening actually less nowadays, and the courts relying more on guardian ad litems to talk to the children and make a report back to the court. I'm not sure if that's good, bad, or indifferent.
Guardian ad litem
That's a
as defined by?
Yeah, usually well, it's an independent attorney. In some cases, it can be a social worker, a psychologist, psychiatrist, someone who is appointed by the court, who's going to be like the extension of the judge, the eyes and ears of the judge, because you don't want to break that cardinal rule nowadays, which is you never, ever, ever bring a child into the courtroom.
Right.
Okay, so that's why the GALs come into play, and you have the eyes and ears of the judge. He or she has to be a neutral party, and they have to complete a thorough investigation, meet with both parents, meet with the children, so on and so forth, and then they report to the judge about their findings. They can make recommendations, but the judge doesn't always have to follow them.
And a guardian ad litem is technically appointed by the court to protect the interest of the child. So they go out to the houses, they talk to the parents, maybe talk to teachers, interview the child.
Doctors.
They actually do a very extensive check into everything that's going on in this child's life, and their role is to report, as Jackie said, back to the judge what they think is in the child's best interest and lay out what their findings are and why they have certain recommendations. There was a famous one, actually, not too long ago. That was the one involving a child who had a relationship with a chief judge of the Supreme Court, and whether or not that child was in that child's best interest to continue that relationship or not. That was an example of a guardian ad litem reporting back to the court.
And while we're not ready to talk about child abuse per se right now, there are court-appointed case workers. That's not the same as a guardian.
That's right. You have, Rhode Island and Mass has a family service department where they can send out a family service investigator just to make a home visit. They would not be completing an investigation to the extent that a guardian ad litem would, but they would at least be going out and having some type of minimal investigation.
I think Debbie's actually getting more into the DCYF Rhode Island type of case.
And we'll hold on
where there's a CASA worker, court-appointed special advocate.
Okay.
To stick with what we were talking about at the opening of the segment, if this child's placement has been settled and the situation changes, there had been a divorce, they've settled where they're going to be living, however, one parent remarries, and say the woman remarries, and the husband has a job, it absolutely takes him out of state. what's the status then? We thought everything was nice and settled, and it was, as that situation was. Now the situation has evolved, changed. What happens next, and what should happen next?
So now you have a modification, okay? So if the parties are divorced and there, of course, there's going to be a custody order in there, the parent cannot remove the child from the state without getting permission from the court, unless both parents agree to it. And I
Right.
always tell them, get it in writing, okay?
Right.
If they don't agree to it, then you know you're going to litigate it in a family court setting. So then the question is, again, back to what's in the best interest of the child. One person says the child should be in Rhode Island. The other parent says, well, I have to go to New Jersey. I have custody of the children. I'm not going to New Jersey just to live there for 3 weeks. I'm going there because I'm remarried and my spouse has a job. You have to look at the facts of the case back to subjectiveness.
Right.
And in particular cases, you do need a guardian ad litem, because now really what you're having is you're having a custody issue, and you're taking a child who's used to being in one place, and now you're
Uprooting them.
Right.
yeah.
Well, Jackie and I have had several cases
Yeah.
of this nature where one parent, for one reason or another, wants to move out of state, and that parent may be the custodial parent under the original order, and they need permission to move. And there's a couple of things, you know, as we've become more and more a mobile society, it's really, and as the economy has sort of tanked a little
Yes.
bit, people needing to move for jobs, it's become a big issue. When I first started again, usually it was someone moving from Rhode Island to Massachusetts. It wasn't that big a deal. You could drive to visit. It didn't change all that much. But now there's much more movement, I think. And the seminal case in Rhode Island on this now is Dupre versus Dupre, where I believe it was the wife wanted to move to Huahani, an island in the Pacific. And it's actually a fun case to read.
Yeah, it really is, yeah.
I think Justice Soutel wrote it.
Yeah.
But what Dupre does is it comes back to those Patinano standards that we talked about, what's in the best interest of the child. But I think there's a little two-step prong there, because you also say, well, what is the purpose for the move?
Yeah.
Why are you moving out of state? Is there a substantial reason? Are you just moving because you want to see a different part of the country? Or is it for a job or family? Or let's talk about what that reason is. And once you get past that prong, then where is it best for the child to be?
In that case, they weren't very young children.
Right.
They were close to teenagers if they weren't, I forget the age of the children.
Right, I forgot myself.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, if the two parents are in agreement that this is an acceptable situation, and you say, get it in writing, if they get it in writing, and presumably they're very reasonable, logical people, and mom is moving out of town, then dad might have more visitation in blocks of time, and they work that out. Seems simple. If they do, maybe that can be done in a few days. What's the process? Do they need to get lawyers involved and have this become a protracted 6-month litigated
Are
battle?
you talking about if they
there's
agree
not
or they
agreement.
don't agree?
If they're not agreeing, now they have to get you
Yeah.
two involved or somebody involved.
Yeah.
And then what happens? Is it months and months before this can be resolved, even though theoretically the two who want to move may be ready to pack their bags
Right.
and
It could take a while,
It's
yeah.
like-
It could take a while.
It's a new litigation, it's a new
Yeah.
case, and
It's not going to happen overnight.
there may be a need for discovery, which
Yeah.
is where you find out from the other side what their evidence is. You want to know what their reason for moving is, perhaps. Show us the job offer. So you have the right to do discovery before trial, and then it could be a trial. There may be a need, as Jackie had said, to appoint a guardian ad litem who's going to need time to do a investigation and a report. So it's not an overnight process. It's not like I'm coming in on Wednesday, I'll have an order on Thursday, and I'll see you in Hunahani.
Eventually, what happens with those cases is they ultimately settle, but it's a matter of compromise on both sides, because if a child's going to be moving 3 or 4 states away, then of course it cuts into the time of the non-custodial
Yes.
parent. So the compromise is we need to change the time-sharing schedule, whether it be the non-custodial parents has the child all summer, so that's a compromise.
Didn't we have that with someone who moved to
Yep.
Europe or something?
Exactly. That's right. The child is here all summer. The child is here for school vacations, so that that parent does have more time than they normally would if the child lived, 2 cities away. Sometimes they'll even agree to make some type of modification to child support because of the cost of transporting the child, especially if there's a
Right.
plane fare that has to be paid. And when you're thinking about it, if it's a young child, you're paying 4 plane fares because you don't want to have a young child chaperone, So one
Even
parent
file.
travels with the child up and the other parent, whatever it
Perhaps
is.
flies
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
Now, as you're laying out these scenarios, it